Hi, let's talk about what we learned today. I'm Chris, and I'm joined by Jessica.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest with us. We have Nichole Sater Foss.
The amazing historian friend of mine. So first of all, I'm so excited about today.
Yeah.
We're going to learn a lot of new information from Nichole. She's brilliant and has a lot to share with us. And I'm especially excited about this because approaching a holiday like Thanksgiving, I feel like I'm always like embarrassed and humbled by how little I know about like what actually went down and why it exists and things like that. And Nichole knows these things and she knows them well. And well enough that I can regurgitate a lot of what I learned from her and share with my children. And that's what I really would love to be able to do this holiday season, is like really be able to teach and pass on important information to my kids. So a little bit about Nichole, first of all. She attended Cal State Los Angeles, where she completed a BA in social studies and an MA in history. She then completed a PhD in history with a doctorate emphasis in feminist studies at UCSB with specialties in women's history and 19th century America. Nichole taught history at the university level in gender, women's and American history, and writing at UCSB and CSULA. She was also a faculty member for the Bard's Masters in Teaching program in Los Angeles, where she taught graduate level courses in history and teacher education. She now teaches history at an independent school in Los Angeles.
But most importantly, she's a really good friend.
And she's amazing. What a brilliant, amazing woman. So hello, Nichole. We're so happy to have you.
Hi, thanks. I'm excited to be here. And I have my Jessica style beverages. I've got 3 ready to go.
Oh, wow.
My tea and my bubble water. You've trained me well, so I'm prepared. What flavor are you drinking today?
I have 2, and this is called Aha, and it's strawberry cucumber. And I have tea, but I left it on the bathroom counter.
Oh, no.
I'll run and get it. I have a new mug. It's really, really, really cute.
What sparkle water flavors are you drinking?
I have blackberry citrus, and I am drinking rose mint tea.
Ooh, rose mint. Have you tried that, Jess?
I don't think I have. I love anything rose, though. And that blackberry citrus, I think, is one of Christopher's favorites.
It's one of my new favorites.
And then I don't know what tea I'm drinking. Christopher made it for me.
I think it's a London Fog.
Yes. Ooh, pretty.
Ooh, that's a pretty mug. If you're not watching on YouTube, Nichole and Jessica both have very pretty mugs.
We're showing our mugs to each other.
I'll show my mug, too. I'm drinking out of a Starbucks Boston mug, which I thought was kind of appropriate for
That's
today.
kind of appropriate.
Kind of. In the area.
Nice.
It's totally appropriate.
It's excellent. And we usually talk about what we learned today a little bit.
Or what we learned this week.
What we learned this week.
We expanded out a little.
And I have something big that we didn't mention last week, but we started Luke in speech therapy.
Oh.
So what do you mean? Oh, yeah. You know,
I'm feigning the audience response. Yeah.
But
I was there.
Our 1-year-old Luke has been in occupational therapy and physical therapy, and that is organized by our county regional center. He's also had an early interventionist, and he's had all of those services for about 6 months. And the speech therapy, they don't have us do until 18 months, but a lot of people online have been really encouraging us to try to pursue speech therapy for him. He is currently delayed, like he's around 81% delayed in speech. And he has a chromosomal microdeletion, which is normal for him to be in that delay level. So we just want to support him and help him as much as we can in the early stages. And I'm just really excited about the speech therapy. And we're going out of pocket-ish, but through insurance. And it's actually not that expensive. Like, I'm glad that we're doing it right now. I think after insurance, it's about $30 a session, just if anybody wants to know and not be like intimidated by going out of pocket by services and things that they need. It's been good.
Yeah, we've only done one session, but I feel like it's going to be a really great tool for them.
Yeah, I really like the speech therapist. I feel like we're parents who always really narrate what we do around our children and are intentional to be verbal with them. But we're now emphasizing more even sound effects like ooh and ah, because that's what Luke really needs. And in the past, our other kids have needed more mama, dada, and like words, but Luke we're breaking it down to at an earlier stage.
We got to get some sounds out of him before we can have him like turn them into words.
Yeah. So it's been really nice having that guidance. And I'm looking forward to working with her. And I think when our regional center starts organizing the speech element too at 18 months, I think that they can just use the same speech therapist that we're using now.
I hope so. I really like
I think it'll all work out. But I just want to say thank you to everybody on the internet who's encouraged us in this process and given us recommendations. And I look forward to being able to share what we learn and encourage other parents who might be having similar things that they're dealing with. So thank you, everybody.
How does it work? Is it over Zoom or?
It is over Zoom right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's over Zoom. And it's, I don't know any different, but I think it's great. Like, I don't have any issue with it being over Zoom. And Luke is very engaged and excited about seeing people on Zoom. And I think it's fun for him.
He's used to the Zoom therapy sessions right now anyway, because he has so many and they're all through Zoom. So like whenever we turn on Zoom, he just like crawls up, climbs up to the couch to see and waves and smiles. So he's like super cute about it.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about today's main topic.
Yes.
But before we get into it, I do want to mention something that I learned this week, which is that our new merch is out.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to do a shameless plug for our merch. But it's a really cool, I'm really proud of it because I designed it and Jessica came up with the concept of it, but it says wholesome content and it's like a retro sweater.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
It's super cute. And
there's pullover. What is it called?
It's called a crew neck.
A crew neck.
A crew neck sweater. And we actually have our first youth size that we've ever had. And it's a t-shirt that says wholesome content. And it's really cute.
Can they make an adult t-shirt too?
They didn't. We didn't.
I'm gonna see about.
We have to see how everything else does. We have to see how everything else does. But like we can only put out so much at a time. And I'm just excited that we have any youth size thing at all. This is our first time doing that. And when Christopher says we learned that our merch was up, I found it last night by looking at the website. Like we just like got surprised by it. So
add that to my collection.
Yeah, Nichole has an incredible shirt collection. Nichole, do you want to tell us a couple of your favorite shirts that you have?
Oh, yeah. So I'm really into t-shirts that are making a statement, right, Dave? So today I'm wearing my history t-shirt and it says, "That's what I do. I read books, I drink coffee, and I know things." And so this was something my mom got for me. And I'm also putting together my collection of women's history type t-shirts that I'm enjoying wearing on Fridays as well to sort of liven it up for the students who are having a hard time on Zoom this year.
Yes, Nichole has a lot of very fun shirts.
I only need one of those retro style.
Yeah, I think you'd like it. Nichole also sports a lot of our hoodies often. It's very, very sweet. She looks very nice in the rose, I must say. It's definitely her color. And did you learn anything this week, Nichole?
I did actually. I learned some new things about presidents and their understanding of Thanksgiving. So history is one of those subjects where you're always learning more and there's always new ways of looking at old sources. And so, even if you studied history for years, I think what most historians would say is as they study more, they feel like they don't know enough. So in looking at some of my back lectures on Thanksgiving and on the Puritans, I came across some new information that I'm excited to talk about.
That's a really cool way of like looking at things that as you learn more, you realize you need to learn more. Like that is a really cool way of looking at life, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's like there's a trajectory when you finish high school, you think you know everything, you start your BA and you're like, I know all this history stuff. You get into your master's, you're like, whoa, what happened? I know nothing. And then by the time your PhD, you recognize, I know a little bit about this one thing really well. And then there's, tons of other stuff out there that you're constantly learning.
Do you like that feeling of like, oh, there's way more to this that I don't know? Or does that sometimes that intimidates me. Does that intimidate you? Or does that energize you as a historian?
It's a little bit of both, because I think like the natural inclination of historians and teachers is I have to know everything, because if the students ask me a question, I have to be able to answer that. Or what if I look silly? And so sometimes when you're putting together something new that you haven't really thought about much before, it can be a little nerve-wracking. But I also really like how there's still so much to learn. And every time I assign papers, even to my 8th graders, I teach 11th and 8th grade currently, they still teach me things that are new as well. And it's interesting because we're working on Civil War papers right now. And a few of the students are investigating Thanksgiving. And so I always learn new tidbits from them. The favorite projects are women soldiers and women nurses and African-American soldiers, but I always get a few kids who want to look into how Thanksgiving became a national holiday.
Well, that's perfect because I'm really excited to learn more about how Thanksgiving became a national holiday as well. Let's check and see if we have any sponsors today first, and then we'll hear all about Thanksgiving from Nichole. We are so grateful that we have Nichole as our guest today. We will have some dark historical themes that we touch on. As far as I believe, it's appropriate for all audiences, but if you do have any concerns or a sensitive child that might be listening, please listen along with them and talk with them during the podcast, or please pre-screen this and make sure that it is content that you want your child to hear.
So I actually did a little research for this.
Yeah.
I watched one of our old vlogs where we went to the Pilgrim Plantation.
The Plymouth?
The Plymouth. Yeah, the Plymouth Plantation.
Have you been there, Nichole?
I have not. So I've done most of my research and traveling has been relegated to the South where my dissertation was on. So I have not been there, but we do have plans for it. And then, this happened. So we're sort of at home for right now.
Well, I have to say I was really impressed at the time when we went. It seemed like they were very dedicated to, even down to the dialects. It seemed like they were trying to be very accurate. And they also did not break character when we visited them. So
No, they treated you like a guest in their home. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
The kids would be like, "What's that?" And they're like, "Oh, that is the fireplace." And they used the accent and everything. It is neat.
And what would you call those people, Nichole? Are they the Puritans, or like the first people who were like in Plymouth?
I think they're generally referred to as either the Pilgrims, which might be the initial batch, and then Puritans as a group, because that was the faith that they expressed and that was the purpose of their community.
Okay, so I can't remember if the representation was of I don't think it was the first group. Was it the first people who popped right off the Mayflower?
I don't know. We also toured the Mayflower too.
What was that?
It wouldn't be historically accurate anyway if they're the first group, because the first batch of Pilgrims really had a gruesome first year. So.
Yeah, I don't think it was. And then they also had they had an area that I don't know, but it almost felt like it was installed as an afterthought. Mm-hmm. That was like a native village that was trying to pay homage to the people that were there first.
The Wampanoag people?
Yeah, the Wampanoag.
That's pretty good, Christopher. I'm impressed with that.
I told you I did research.
I was like, I'm going to say Wampanoag, and no one's going to know what that means. But maybe
sorry, I didn't mean to steal any thunder, but that's like the one little nugget that I got out of our vlog. So, but we did visit that village, and it was really neat. Or homestead, I think is what they called it. It was really cool.
Did you try to get them to break character at all?
They were actually more modern in that group. They were more like matter of fact and explaining like how things worked back then. And then when you got into the actual Plymouth Plantation, that's when everyone was acting and in character. But they had like a kid. Do you remember that? There was like a family. They actually had a kid there. I don't know exactly how it
I think they were actually representing their relatives and telling their history. So they weren't impersonating characters. Or the impersonating people.
I really liked that segment of the museum, or I don't know if you call it a museum.
I don't know what it's called, but I believe that part was very intentional and trying to possibly correct some historical representation. And I don't know. Let's hear from Nichole on this.
Did the Puritans actually celebrate Thanksgiving? Is that something that they did? Was there a big banquet at some point?
Well, the first Thanksgiving that we've sort of modeled our holiday after is questionable. So Puritans understood their whole natural world through their relationship with God. And if there was disease or illness, they believed that God was displeased with them. And so they needed to fast. And if they had a good harvest or something good was happening in the community, they believed God was happy with them. So they would feast. And so feasts and fasts were a regular practice for Puritan communities, and they actually had many days of fasts and many days of Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving that we sort of have based our holiday after is probably this 3-day feast that took place in 1621 or so, which some historians, at least early on, acknowledged was a celebration of their first year of settlement. And basically, I think they were just happy to be alive at that point, because there was nearly a 50% death rate in that first year of Puritan settlement. And colonizing is a dangerous and very difficult process. So the story is that the Wampanoag people were invited and brought with them supplies because the Puritans were suffering. But others actually argue that this wasn't a Thanksgiving at all, but a gathering to recognize some kind of trade or land deal between the Wampanoag and the Puritans so that they would have more land to settle and to farm. It's probably a little bit of a combination of both, that they were happy that the agreement had taken place, but supposedly the Puritans were there with 90 or so Wampanoag Native Americans who also joined them. And then over time, this becomes a very northern tradition and very much focused in areas like Massachusetts, where Puritans had the greatest influence, at least initially, and then was not something that was celebrated throughout America, and especially not in the South, because the South has its own origin history as well that's completely different from Puritans' colonization in the North.
I feel like I never really thought about that. Like the fact, like I feel like when we talk about origins, like there is this picture of like Thanksgiving in America, but yeah, like people were arriving to all down that coast and region, right?
Yeah, and I think that's actually intentional. I mean, that's the purpose. When Thanksgiving becomes more of a national holiday, that is the purpose, is to promote sort of a national identity. But when the colonies are settled, there's, three sort of distinct groups of colonies: the South, the Middle, and the North, and they all have very, very different practices. They had different ideas about gender. They had different ideas about democracy. They had different kinds of interactions with the indigenous people around them. And Americans sort of came to like, I think, this idea of the Puritan and Thanksgiving and sort of the peaceable relationship between Native Americans and American or European colonists, excuse me.
And so when did it become like a national thing? Like when did our whole nation sort of adopt this northern idea of this like peaceful union?
That's a good question. So some of our earliest presidents, like George Washington's and John Adams, they celebrated Thanksgiving, and they thought it was an important way of recognizing American colonization as well. But not all presidents did. Thomas Jefferson didn't celebrate Thanksgiving. If you know about Thomas Jefferson, he's one of the founding fathers, which I use in quotations, because he was the founding father who was really most interested on separation between church and state. And so he felt in many ways that Thanksgiving was a holdover from religious expression, and wanted to really make sure that the president didn't put his favor in forth of any kind of religion. So he didn't celebrate it, but he also received some flack for that by other politicians and even American people. He really thought that it was a violation too of the First Amendment, and that the freedom of religion and the expression of that. So that's how it was sort of settled or practiced until the 19th century, when America is in the middle of the Civil War. And at the height of the Civil War in 1863, Abraham Lincoln really issues a national proclamation encouraging all Americans to celebrate Thanksgiving. And this is when we start to see this as being sort of a national identity and the origin story for white Americans. I think it's really important to point that out, that this was a story that really celebrated their endeavors. Into the Civil War, people were still identifying as being, part of a state rather than part of a nation, or part of a region rather than a nation. And one line that I really like out of the proclamation, at least that really shows Lincoln's purpose, was he said, "With one heart and one voice by the whole American people." And his proclamation was really focused on gratefulness and as a way to distract people from the tragedies of the Civil War. And the Civil War was unique in many ways, but one way that it was especially unique is that photography had been developed by that point. And it took a really long time still for an image to be captured. And so what most people saw as images coming back from the war were images of people who had died, or images of the remnants of a battlefield, or, which was also really popular, was images of people holding their weapons before they left for war. And so Americans were suffering in terms of suffering by war, but in a new way, with being sort of faced with the realities of it in a way different than historically they had seen. So he issued a Thanksgiving proclamation in 1863 that was really about perseverance and obedience and thankfulness, focusing on what people still had rather than what they had lost. I think it was also meant to be a morale booster as well, just as a break, as something to distract Americans from other than the tragedy of war.
So between 1621 and 1863, what was going on with the Wampanoag tribe? Like, what was going on with all the people in these different places?
Yeah, so the Wampanoag and Native Americans in general, right, are a really diverse group of people. So before contact in the Americas, there were somewhere between 7 and 12 million indigenous people living here. It's hard for us to calculate the exact number. So in 1492, before contact. And they were all different cultural groups. They spoke over 200 different unique languages. Even here in California, we had a very diverse and unique Native population or indigenous population. And they also had a really different understanding of the use of land. And so Europeans came into contact, and I'm going to focus more on English colonization and in America rather than South America, but they made agreements with Puritans thinking they were sharing the land with them, because that's how indigenous populations worked. They didn't believe in fencing in land. They didn't have an idea that this land is mine and not yours, and you can't come onto it. And so as Puritan encroachment continued, the tensions between those groups really heightened. And I think that especially for the Wampanoag, and we can talk about, some specific events like King Philip's War that really affects them and sort of wipes out many of the surviving people. But they made these agreements to share the land with Europeans who had a completely different idea of the use of land and what it meant and who it belonged to. And over the course of interaction with Europeans, there is a 60 to 90% death rate for Native Americans. Like, even on the island that was came in contact with Christopher Columbus, the island of Hispaniola, there were 1.2 million people living there. And after contact, only 200 were left. So wow. It's a really terrible story of disease. I mean, there were a number of diseases that Native Americans were not immune to, like the common cold, like the flu, particularly influenza and smallpox. And Europeans had come into contact with those diseases for years, and so had built up immunities that Native Americans did not have. And then with constant conflict over the encroachment in land, there were wars taking place too between the Puritans and between Native Americans, and different rebellions that really decimated the final populations. And then in 1830, there's a move under the Andrew Jackson administration to remove the remaining Native Americans who were along the East Coast and force them into reservations in less desirable territories. And that's where we see, initially Oklahoma is created as a reservation for Native American groups without any concern really of if they were similar people. And then we have another major toll on the people as they're moved forcibly, especially on the Cherokee population who are coming out of North Carolina and Georgia.
And did you say 1840?
1830.
1830. So, and then 30 years later, Abraham Lincoln was like, let's make this holiday and tell this story. Is that right?
Well, I think that I don't know how much that he intentionally wanted to change the history. I mean, this is also newer history that we've uncovered. I mean, there's always been who is interested in the sources and how you interpret them. And so Native American history was taught very differently. The Native American people had a oral tradition rather than a written tradition. It's one of the reasons why Europeans felt like that they were superior to indigenous populations. And so there's been a lot of work to sort of recreate that among indigenous populations. And then also in looking at the sources that were primarily written from a European perspective to think about how that actually impacted people who were there first. So Lincoln issued this more as not really, I don't think as a way to erase Native American history, but as a way to celebrate white history. And that becomes like the primary story. He's the one who makes Thanksgiving on the 4th Thanksgiving of November. FDR later tries to change that by making it on a different day, thinking that it would help the economy during the Great Depression, which Americans resisted. That tradition had already really settled in on the day that we celebrate it. And it becomes a national holiday in an actual bill in 1941. So if you think about how long, right, that America was in the process of being settled and rebelling and revolution and Civil War, it only becomes a real holiday in 1941, which is not that long considering.
What was, when Abraham Lincoln was pushing for it, was there a different story than in 1941? Like, was there a change to it? Was there an emphasis more on the Puritans? Or I feel like when I was a kid, the story was Native American, Puritan came together at the table, shared, like broke bread and like just were celebrating that they were all together and like.
There's also the story of like Squanto. And that like he spoke English and was able to communicate with them and like taught them how to fertilize the soil and how to survive because they were doing so poorly. And then they had their Thanksgiving. That's what I was taught in school.
Yeah.
And then we made the paper hats.
Yeah, then everybody like made hats and made outfits that like dressed up like the various people
and had cornbread.
Yeah. So how far off is that? And is that what it was originally like proposed to look like by the various like presidents and in the different time periods? Like what's changed and what is inaccurate?
Well, you asked a question too about historical memory, which is a newer field in sort of the historiography, or which is the study of history. And so that's how events are remembered and how that changes, and sometimes how it differs from the actual event. And so I think historical memory changes and people shape things for what the purpose that they want as well. And most of the time, things happen in history that nobody actually recognizes one day is going to be the thing. Like, you know, for example, I study a woman from South Carolina who moved from the North into the South, and she wrote a lot of letters to her sister, probably never intending that 200 years later, some historian was going to like, you know, analyze every intimate detail of her household and how much money she spent on sheets that day. So, you know, it's hard to know and to read the audience of how that has changed over time. And then I think what you're saying, Christopher, is also, you know, a very generous explanation, because the Puritans basically survived because they were taught skills by Native Americans. And so they weren't prepared. And the same thing happens in the South as well, that there's a really high mortality rate because they're not prepared. They have different expectations of what the land will be like, of what the climate will be like. And it's also really difficult to bring supplies in back and forth. And the thing like the potato, right? The potato was something that was original to America. Europeans didn't know how to grow potatoes. And that is something now that was taken back with them. And now we associate certain European cuisines with the potato like it was their uniquely possessed item, but that is an indigenous crop to America. Wow. So there's also the story of Squanto, which I think a lot of people celebrate as this relationship between Native Americans and between the colonists. But Squanto's whole family died. He didn't have, you know, all from disease and conflict. And it's not really a story of celebration for him. At least I wouldn't think it like that. And then, Jessica, you asked a question about teaching our children, right? And so I can only say really for what I did. And the first time I came into sort of like thinking about this and what it would mean for my own daughter, who's 9, she was in kindergarten, I believe. And she came home with an image of what was like a stick figure of Christopher Columbus dancing on a boat with an indigenous person. And I just thought, this is not the history now that I want to sort of embed in my daughter's mind. And we started with, you know, a pretty basic explanation, leaving out a lot of the gory details about what really happened to Native Americans. kind of using the term contact versus discovery, right? Suggesting that there was a whole entire people and culture that lived here, and it wasn't this unfounded land that was discovered for European purposes. And then as she's matured, we go into more of the details, I think, of what actually happened as a consequence. I think that the focus on this peaceable relationship between Puritans and Native Americans is a somewhat dangerous belief, because as you were saying, you didn't learn anything different. I didn't learn anything different either. When I was in 4th grade, my favorite class was history. No shocker there. And that was the year in California history. And that was the year we learned about missions with no perspective of the indigenous people who lived in the missions. We all built a mission. Mine was terrible. It was made out of toilet paper rolls. I think it was really bad.
Mine was really good.
I bet, right?
I went all out.
There was always the kid whose dad was like an architect too, who would come in with the Lincoln logs and
and I think now they just sell models that you just buy.
Yeah, you can get the styrofoam models just pre-cut.
And we learned about the gold rush, also not learning about how it displaced indigenous populations. And I think that it sort of leads to this idea that the country was ours to settle, and that it didn't impact the people who were here first in the ways that it did. I mean, and that's a really important history. It continued to be it continued to be a terrible situation in many ways for indigenous populations who were forced into American boarding schools, who were forced to give up their cultural identities, were forced to cut their hair and live away from their parents. I mean, can you imagine that kind of experience, having your children taken away from you as part of a nationalizing project? Mm-hmm. And so when we focus on that side, I think that we are emphasizing an untruthful a story about our history and not acknowledging what is actually part of our country's history.
What would you say they did that was harmful other than things like disease?
Well, the Puritans, right, are famed for coming to America seeking religious tolerance. And these are probably the least tolerant people of all religious faiths at the time. And they are very exclusive. Their rules are steadfast, and any kind of failure to follow those rules could result in excommunication. A couple of very famous Puritans were forced out of the community, like Roger Williams, who leaves and goes to Rhode Island, where he starts the Baptist faith. Anne Hutchinson was excommunicated for having ideas and also being a woman who talked about her religious ideas. She was excommunicated along with her family to the outskirts of Rhode Island and then later New York. And she was killed by Native American groups who were unhappy with settlement on their land. The Puritans also repeatedly encroached upon Native American communities and villages. And there was a war led by an alliance between the Wampanoags and the Narragansett culture groups there. And in retaliation, and so it was a big war, and Puritans were suffered losses, but in retaliation, Puritans went after women and children and burned down Native American villages. And there's also, as I mentioned earlier, the rules about Puritans and what could be said in their communities. There were proselytizers, especially from Quaker groups. Mary Dyer is a really famous woman who kept coming back into Massachusetts and trying to spread ideas of Quakerism, which were much more egalitarian. And she was eventually hanged for it because Puritans had warned her that we don't want you coming in here and talking about that and spreading those ideas. And so she is later hanged as the ultimate punishment for breaking the covenant. She was originally a Puritan as well. So I worry too much about celebrating these people as harbingers of goodwill and religious tolerance, because the history of their society does not warrant that.
I feel like when we talk about history and we go like, oh, well, they were hanged and they did this, like, I can't imagine that now. And like, I try to put myself like, this was real, like people really hurt each other. And that was like how they became successful or how they moved up in life in that time. Kind of the
standard.
And I just can't imagine that being the standard or that being our government, people who do things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it shouldn't, it's almost normalized as like historical stuff that happens, but I really try to imagine that happening now and how terrifying that seems.
I think that violence was a daily experience for a lot of people living in early America, for all populations, and especially for women who had no legal rights and no legal identity, and were considered almost like children under the law if they were married. I mean, they lost their name, they lost their property, they lost their wages, they lost their voice, they couldn't protect their children. And
that was the white Protestant, the white Puritan women. But
what about in America?
What about the indigenous cultures?
Indigenous cultures had much more egalitarian roles. They recognized like the dual necessity of men and women working together. They were, many of them, and I don't want to generalize because there's over 200 different groups or so of people living here that have different interesting cultures. But as a community of people, if you think of them that way, they were oftentimes matrilineal, in which women married and the husband left his home and came to a woman's home so that collectively the women in the family could help raise the children. Women were in charge of agriculture in a lot of these communities, and agriculture brought in 90% or so of the food that was supplied to Native American groups. Men still hunted, but women are bringing in the food that really sustains them long term. And because of that, women were recognized as being significant contributors to the community. That was another way too that Europeans looked at Native Americans and said, look at all those women working. Men are lazy, right? We're going to teach them how to do the right thing. We're going to teach them the right way of being men. And so it's this idea of ethnocentrism that Europeans bring with them wherever they go to spread their process of colonization, that that they have this idea that the way they do things is the one and only way, it's the best way. And because other societies don't live up to that, they deserve this kind of interaction in which they're forced to change. And it's disheartening too, because those practices that were egalitarian sort of shift over time, because some Native American groups try to shift their culture in order to protect themselves. So example, the Cherokee, who live in Georgia and North Carolina, they adopt a written language. They start publishing a newspaper. They sort of shift the way labor is done in that cultural group so that they look more like Europeans.
I know that they had like women were accused of witchcraft if they were to something in that society. Like there are a variety of reasons. But do you think that's how they looked at the women in Native American communities as well?
They certainly believed that women were dangerous. That's also the sort of gender norm that's expected about women, that they're corruptible and they corrupt men and that they're immoral and sinful. This sort of shifts in the 19th century, which is a whole nother talk about domesticity and the ideology around motherhood that sort of is central to our current cultural understandings. But women, like I mentioned Anna Hutchinson earlier, she was accused of being a witchcraft and of heresy just because she was challenging the way that ministers in the Puritan churches were disseminating doctrine. And she believed they had it wrong, that they were arguing something that was theologically opposed to Puritan beliefs, and she was punished for it. And women in Puritan society were punished for everything. And that also leads back again to that idea of superstition and about not understanding the natural world around them, because things were always explained through that like relationship between the community and between God, and the way that people might upset that relationship as members of the community not acting appropriately.
You do celebrate Thanksgiving. Like you do have Thanksgiving. So when you do that, is that how much of the history gets kind of embedded in what you're doing, like with your daughter? Do you talk about this stuff, or do you wait until they're older, or like what do you personally do? Not what should everybody do, but like what's kind of your take on it?
Well, unfortunately, my daughter gets this all the time. So there's never like this is the day where we get history. And sometimes she's like, oh, Mom, you're doing your history again. And my poor husband, too, the other day, he asked me a question about the Civil War. And I was like, yes, that was my opportunity. I'm going to tell you all the things. So my family gets it all the time. And when when her school celebrated Thanksgiving the first time, I let her partake in the traditions that they were doing, but then when she came home, we had to talk about what it might have really looked like, at least in terms that were appropriate for what I thought she was ready for, and that it's not really a celebration of the loving relationship between indigenous populations and the European colonizers. And then I think now she pretty much knows all the details and all their glory. But that's also something that I've just been very forthcoming with her, because I didn't actually really think about this until I was a college student. And I remember being sort of shocked and being kind of like wanting to rail against the system, because this was not the history that I knew. And so, I just don't want my daughter to have that feeling as well. And I think that if we're going to make things better in the future for our country, it's important that we know the truth behind these moments. And I remember being in a class with one of my favorite professors. Her name is Cheryl Coos. And she was telling us about this moment where she ruined Mother's Day. Mother's Day also has a really interesting history for another podcast someday.
Ooh, but, yes.
She felt so bad because she was in a fight with her mom, and she told her mom what the real origins of Mother's Day was. And it was just like, she never sort of forgave herself for the way that news was delivered. And so
I cannot wait to hear this.
History as a weapon. That's a fascinating way to look at that.
Yes, but Nichole brings up a really good point. I would love to have Nichole on here lots and lots of times in the future. So if anybody does have any questions or future history topics they'd love to discuss, please put them in the comment section on YouTube. Or I think our podcast also, you can write reviews. You could probably ask a question in there, I think. I don't know how it works. But we would love to hear some topic ideas from you guys. And I know Nichole is already brainstorming some, and I'm very excited about them. So anyway, a little stray from the topic. So can you break it down for me one more time? Like, if you're talking to your child and they come home from school in like typical, like we just learned about Thanksgiving. I don't even know that this is how they do it anymore, though. Is it a little bit more aware now in the public schools?
I think for sure in some of the public schools. I don't know about all the independent schools, and especially those that organize around religious principles as well. So they might have different interpretations. My daughter went to an independent school at that time, so that also might influence how she was taught. And they did have sort of we're going to make the hats with the pilgrim hats, and we're going to make the Native American headbands with the feathers. And that was something too that we talked about when she came home, that there were lots of different people who lived here, and that not all Native Americans wore those kinds of headbands, wore that kind of clothing, or engaged in that kind of activity. So one was just information that I told her about the different the different groups of Native American populations and just how diverse they were, and that it was a misnomer by Europeans to come in and think that everybody was the same just because they all lived here. And this is kind of the legacy of colonization in general. Europeans did this in Africa and in what becomes the Middle East as well, where they see indigenous populations, they find them to be what they would have called uncivilized, and just assume they're all the same kind of person or the same kind of culture. So first was just information. I just told her about different groups and told her about different people living here in California. And that kind of inspired her to look into the school library, and she brought home some books, and she brought home some books on Native American history, and gave them to me so I could use them for my lectures. And she thought that was really a great thing that she'd done. And I did. I took some pictures out of them. They were good pictures.
So what do you think, just on like a very basic level, like I'm not a historian, and what is the best way, do you think, to present Thanksgiving to a small child?
In a historical context.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would avoid the emphasis on the relationship with indigenous populations and Puritans as the focus of the holiday, as the focus of celebration, as being the focus of America's origin story. And I would focus, as we do in our family, that it's a time to be with other people in our family, when we have the time off, when we get to see each other. And it's a time for like regeneration and being thankful, which is what a lot of the purpose or the motive behind the holiday is, but not as a way of celebrating the relationship or excusing the relationship, I should say, between Pilgrims and Native American populations. And I think then as they get older, you can introduce more things. as they start learning some of this, because when you have them at home before they're in school, you're teaching them what you want them to understand of the holiday, just like any other holiday. And then I think you can build on that as they're older, and introduce more ideas about the actual story behind colonization.
Is there a way to use the time as a tool to honor and, I mean, not rectify, but like improve the discussion on the Native American population? Like, is there a way that we can do good by them at this point?
Yeah, I think certainly there's been a switch to have indigenous populations day. We've gotten rid of Columbus Day to replace that as a way and an opportunity to teach young children about indigenous cultures. There are lots of resources out there. I think the missions have sort of an ugly history, but they've done a lot of work recently to sort of teach the actual culture of the people who were put into those mission systems. And we have so many of those in California. There are lots of cultural festivals in which Native American groups are happy to share their history. There's lots of resources out there for young children, and that are produced by scholars who are experts in Native American history or from Native American groups altogether, right? If you're looking for books that you want to use as good sources, but you're not sure of what to use, look at who the publishers are, and look to see, whether or not you can even look them up to see what kinds of books they publish, if they're associated with any kind of bias or perspective. And I think there's certainly more new work done in regard, especially more modern sources in regard to celebrating the different cultures of the people who lived here first.
Yeah, I have found an Instagram account that I really love called the Conscious Kid. And I've seen some great recommendations on books and stuff there. This has been so interesting. I'm so grateful that you agreed to come here today, Nichole. And that you're able to speak so well on these things. I feel like topics like this trip me up personally, and I get very insecure about my own knowledge, and I worry that I could hurt or offend someone saying something one way or the other. Like I just really hope that this channel in general is a place that's like of love and acceptance and of learning. And I'm so grateful that you're here today supporting that. And just in general, everybody in the comments section, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I feel like Nichole's a wealth of information, and you guys are as well. So let's just make sure to be like kind of and loving and understanding as any words or things that we're saying change, because it's history. It changes, right?
Even the terminology. That's used.
Yeah, and
that's a whole lesson in itself, is what we use, why we've used it, what we used before, why we change it. So yeah,
I'd love to hear about that from you as well. So yay. And so what we do on this podcast is we usually have a quiz time, and we're going to do a little quiz with you right now, Nichole. And it's just to have fun. Is this a BuzzFeed quiz today?
Oh, sure is. Well, do you want to do something on food, or what kind of Thanksgiving guest you are?
Oh, let's do what kind of Thanksgiving guest you are.
Yes, do it for sure.
Okay, we'll do that right after we check and see if we have any sponsors. So this part of the podcast is where we take a silly quiz. So we're not going to be it's not an intellectual quiz. Okay.
Can't fail it.
So we're going to find out what kind of Thanksgiving guest you are. And I think Jessica is simultaneously going to be taking this quiz for herself.
Yeah, or for us. So we're doing this at the same time. We're trying to see if we can tighten this up a little bit by not asking the questions a bunch of times.
So the first question is, what's your favorite thing about autumn? Is it leaf peeping?
What is that?
I don't know.
Okay. Clearly not that choice.
Sweater weather, everything pumpkin, new TV shows, the holidays, or winter is coming?
Sweater
weather.
I'm kind of on board with that too, but I'm also like new TV shows and the holidays. I feel like what would you say?
For me, it's the holidays.
The holidays. Okay, we're gonna say the holidays. We're being a couple guessed.
Okay, this one's kind of visual. You've got to pardon one of these turkeys. So I'm gonna show you some turkeys, and you've got to choose one to pardon.
There's one that's like greenish.
I can't see any of those in the screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But I'm going to say whatever is the most colorful.
Whatever's the most colorful.
Do that
Okay.
green one. That green
So
one's fascinating.
there's a really pretty one with green feathers and a like bright red comb.
And it's making this face.
That's green's my favorite color. Let's go with that.
Okay, so we're gonna go with that one.
What about this one, Christopher? This one that's like
there's
king
one that's
of the
got a really
turkeys.
really fanned out tail. We're gonna go with that one.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the parade? I'll watch it. I'll watch it in person. Watch it. I want to be in it. I'll DVR it. Meh. There's a parade.
That's what I was going to say. There's a parade. I don't know what they're talking about. So I'm going to say there's
the
a
Macy's
parade.
Thanksgiving Day Parade.
I don't know what that is.
Did you know that Hamilton's going to have a blip in the Macy's Day Parade this year?
No, that's amazing.
When I read that, my response to that is whichever one is, I'm asleep. I don't care what the other people are doing, and they want to watch the parade, but I have no interest.
I think meh.
Matt, or I'll DVR it.
Are you going to watch it later? No.
No.
Meh.
I know what that is. I know they've got a. I don't actually know what that is. I've never watched it. Have you watched it?
I think I've watched it once.
Never in my life.
Yeah.
I think is it because of our coast?
I think maybe so. I mean, I don't know. Like my husband's family likes to watch it, and they'll watch it on repeat. So we've already got it. We're running once, and then it starts again for the latecomers, and you're like, again?
Do you watch the Rose Parade?
I used to as a kid, and I went one year stayed overnight to watch the Rose Parade.
Wow.
And that was the one and only year ever. My grandmother and I used to go and visit the floats after the parade where they were parked.
I'd love to do that. I don't want to see the parade, but I do want to go see the float.
It's neat because you can see the flowers up close. Like you can see the intricate details of the floats in a way that you can't see as they're parading by on TV.
Yes. I feel like I'm wildly impressed by the concept, and like they must be so beautiful. I'd love to see them, but I don't think I've ever seen the parade itself.
I don't know if they're doing it this year or if they even still do that because I was a kid, but that seems like a good social distancing outside activity that you could do with people.
It's usually pretty packed.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I don't remember it being packed once the parade is over. It's like the day, or it's like before they destroy it. I don't know. You might know.
Seeing the floats afterward is not packed. Okay.
I don't know.
All right. This one's kind of fun. It's ban a Thanksgiving dish. So you're going to ban one of these. Is it the green bean casserole? Is it nothing? Is it cornbread, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes and marshmallows, or cranberry sauce?
I'm going to say nothing.
I'm in it for the potatoes. Green bean casserole is not my favorite.
So we're gonna get rid of the green bean casserole.
Yeah, I could do without it, but I'm not like aggressively needing to ban it. I feel like you really like it.
No.
There's a lot of moms who are mad at me right now.
Really?
They call the Thanksgiving joy killer.
If you could wear anything for Thanksgiving, what would it be? And the first answer is whatever. Anything with an elastic waist, something stylish in fall colors, a pilgrim outfit, yesterday's underwear, or pajamas.
I'm gonna go with the soft pants, elastic waistband pants.
Okay.
What?
Not the pilgrim?
Why is yesterday's underwear even on there? They were like...
Like you didn't even bother changing?
Like you didn't even shower. You just rolled out of bed and came to the Thanksgiving table.
Okay, I feel like pajamas and anything with an elastic waist is like kind of the same.
I think the year of 2020 is all about the soft pants.
Yes, that's the year of 1983 when I was born. Every year after.
We come into this world with soft pants.
No pants.
No pants.
Yesterday's underwear. I'm going to say pajamas.
Okay. All right. Which relative will ruin Thanksgiving?
Oh.
We've got the drunk uncle. We've got the goth cousin. Racist grandma. Overly political aunt. Eternally crying baby. Or beloved dying pet.
What? Why would that be on there? That's so sad.
I think I'm the worst guest.
What?
I'm the one who's always like, well, we shouldn't really be doing this because...
Is that the overly political aunt?
Political aunt.
You're going to put yourself...
That's going to be me. I'm not an aunt. I have no siblings, but if I were, I would be that person.
I would say beloved dying pet because like, that's so sad. Why would there be a pet dying?
Yeah. Eternally crying baby. That's just our life.
I'm actually a little offended that's on there.
What are you drinking with dinner? White wine, whatever, red wine, water, soda, or beer?
Thanksgiving.
What?
Yes.
Yes.
All of
so
the
whatever.
Red wine, if I had to pick.
Okay.
I feel like they don't like. I would have mulled wine ideally, so that would be red wine.
Okay.
Plus tea, plus
plus tea, plus
sparkling.
sparkle water.
Yeah.
Plus, I feel like there's something missing, like a pumpkin beverage of some sort.
I don't know. There's
I
like
don't know.
cider is usually happening.
Is a new thing. I've never heard of that before.
Oh, the pumpkin.
The pumpkin juice.
Jacob makes a really good pumpkin juice.
No, I'm going to try that.
So we're going to pick a pie now. Is it going to be apple, pecan, is there cake, pumpkin, pie, or all the pies?
Is there cake?
Not a pie person.
I would say pumpkin, but I feel like you'd say pecan, so I guess we'll say all the pies.
Yeah, I love pie.
We'll say
I'll
all
take
the
all the pies. What are your plans for Black Friday? Up and at 'em by 5 a.m.? I feel like this is not a relevant question this year.
Well, just say in general.
In general, okay. Sleep, wait for the online deals, eat leftovers, watch the news coverage, and laugh at the, what is that word?
Plebes.
The plebes. And what's Black Friday?
Sleep.
Okay.
I think I'd also say wait for the. I would say wait for the online deals.
Yeah, I think so too. What are you thankful for? Foods with a Z, obviously.
It's gonna be cool.
Basic human freedoms, naps, must-see TV, friends and family. Are we really going to do this?
Oh, mean.
Friends and family.
Friends and family for us too. Okay. So we got. Do you want to do us first or Nichole?
We'll do Nichole first.
I just saw what yours was. You're gonna love this.
What kind of guest do you think you are?
Fun guest. I don't know.
So you got
Uncle Aunt.
and we found these quizzes to be wildly wrong.
Oh, I was gonna say wildly accurate.
Nope.
It's based on fact.
You got the holiday hater.
What?
The holiday hater.
Oh man, I'm not well.
And I know you. I know you're not a holiday hater.
No.
But there's a picture of a really grumpy person holding a glass of wine.
That's terrible. I love
Um,
Christmas decorating. I'm not that bad.
Says you're like, no thanks, Thanksgiving. That's a pretty good one. Zinga. No thanks, Thanksgiving. Sure, you'll show up at someone's house for a free dinner grudgingly, but you won't enjoy it. Too much holidays, too much huggy-feely times. It's just not your thing.
Yeah, you usually bring the best dish.
You do.
I mean, Friendsgiving is like my favorite thing.
Yes.
I feel like they didn't put much weight on the liking the friends and the family part.
Yeah, they didn't. Okay, so what kind of Thanksgiving guest are we? We are tradition enforcer. You could be an honorary passenger of the Mayflower. That's how much you love Thanksgiving. And you want everyone else to feel the same way.
Oh, and that's in all caps.
Yeah.
They're shouting that we want everyone to follow our traditions.
Wow. I don't think that's true of you all. Of all the people I know, I think that you two are like the most like, we need to do what people feel good about here in this group.
Very true. I'm like, wear your pajamas.
Order a pizza.
Order a pizza. That was going to be my.
Yeah, bring whatever you like.
There
Yeah.
are no rules.
No rules. All right. Well, that was great. We really learned a lot about ourselves.
Or what history will say about us.
Yes. And Nichole, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything exciting coming up for you?
Well, I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving break. My daughter and I both have it off, and nothing that is exciting. We're not traveling anywhere, but it's just going to be nice to have that bit of respite.
Very cool. You know what I'd actually also love to talk to Nichole about is the perspective of teaching over Zoom during the pandemic time. I don't know if anybody else is interested in that, but I am very interested in that. So if anybody else has questions about that, would you like to talk about that or not really?
Well, sure. I would like to talk about it, but I don't know how much there is to say about that. It might need to be built into some other kind of.
Yeah, it might need to be, but I don't.
Or maybe we could talk about strategies for how to keep your students engaged while they're in Zoom school.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Things like that, or things that you've noticed like really make a difference or not. Like,
I feel like that could even apply to like hosting a meeting in like a business. Like,
yeah.
the whole Zoom culture is like a new thing. It's kind of new, at least in the widespread sort of way that it's used now.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's very interesting. And I know that that you've talked to me personally just about things like the difference between, a kid turning their screen off or on, or trying to show up with a hoodie that they cover their whole face with, or whatever, or if you can actually tell if they're playing a video game. I just think there are a lot of fun little things about that. And strategies for teaching and strategies for learning as well.
And also strategies for parents. I think parents are experiencing a lot of frustration. I'm a parent who's teaching at home with my daughter at home. And it's just important to remember, too, what the teachers are going through. There's a lot of pressure on teachers right now as well.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was so cool.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I always love talking with you and about history. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nichole. Anything coming up with us?
I don't think so.
Yeah, we might have Colleen on our next episode. I don't know for sure, but we might. So if anybody has anything they'd like to see us talk with Colleen about, I was thinking maybe like breastfeeding baby stuff, but not necessarily. I don't know. It could also be about you guys and growing up or working together.
Two very different topics.
Yeah. But anyway, so if anybody has any thoughts on that as well, that might be happening in the future. And Nichole, just thanks again. You're wonderful. And I'm so grateful that you took the time to educate us a little bit more today.
Thank you, everybody that's listening out there. And we will talk to you next time.